Welcome back to PH.d TV, and today I'm going to give my ranking for Daniel Craig's James Bond movies. Alright, so Daniel Craig's James Bond movies, the Daniel Craig era is officially over with No Time to Die. Turned out it was time to die. And I will say this, I really enjoyed his tenure, and the reason being, even though I was born in '96, I was kind of sort of raised on the Pierce Brosnan movies, so I have this weird blend where Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig are both my Bonds. But the thing is, Pierce Brosnan was not the one I ever went to the theaters. I never saw Pierce Brosnan in the theater. But the very first Bond movie I ever did get to see in theaters was Casino Royale, and from then, Daniel Craig technically was the Bond that I went to see in the theaters every so often. Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, to Skyfall, and then you have Spectre, and then you have No Time to Die. I got 5 movies to rank, and here we go. At number 5, Spectre. This one, it's okay. Like, it's fine. But I went to see this with a buddy, and we were really excited. After Skyfall, which was the #1 grossing James Bond movie of all time, and it was honestly one of the best ones in the entire franchise, and by far the most beautiful, by director Sam Mendes, who has directed movies that I absolutely love, like American Beauty, 1917, maybe not one of my favorites, but you cannot say it was not expertly directed. There's nothing not stopping me from liking this movie going into it. Then I watched it, and I just felt kind of underwhelmed. And something that I couldn't really get used to at first, and something that I was okay when Quantum did, was that these movies were starting to get tacked together all of a sudden. Because Casino Royale, his first movie, no one knew this would be the beginning of what's called the Daniel Craig arc, where we're gonna follow this character like a Marvel Cinematic Universe, where each movie is essentially a direct sequel. Quantum of Solace did it, where it was an exact sequel to Skyfall, taking place just minutes after, but that was okay. A one-time thing, cool, it's experimental, you're doing it one time, it's gonna stand out, it's gonna make that one movie special, perfect. Skyfall comes out, and we're back to the standalones, where Skyfall is its one separate mission, and he's going up against Raul Silva, and that was it. Then Spectre comes around, and turns out Skyfall was not a standalone mission. Turns out Blofeld was behind everything, and him and James Bond are long lost half-brothers, adopted brothers. I forgot the context, still thought it was just so stupid.
Austin, are you sure you can trust Dr. Evil?
He's my brother, baby. Yeah.
And I know it's the whole joke of the James Bond community. Austin Powers did that first. And 2, again, since everything was connected, they introduced Madeline Swan, who turns out to be James Bond's love interest, and it turns out to be a legitimate love interest. Not the Bond girl where you're gonna expect to see her once and it's more of a fleeing romance, but it's a full-on romance, which is fine. But when you think of Bond in a romance, hardcore, you think Eva Green with Vesper Lynd, and you think Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that's it, and those are literary characters that was designed to be James Bond's 2 romances. Aside from that, he's just a womanizer. But now we have Madeline Swan, and it's leaning really hard into the romance, and almost to a uncharacteristically so way. So with that being said, it was an odd turn, and with having seen No Time to Die now, Spectre makes more sense, especially now that we know it is a 5-movie arc and not just standalone missions that turned out not to be, and they were just winging it as they went. So it does watch better in retrospect, but my initial opinion still kind of sits because it sat there for how long before No Time to Die came out? It was 6 years of me thinking James Bond got sappy all of a sudden. And again, there's nothing wrong with sappy. I even like romance movies, but it's a character thing. James Bond's never been this gung-ho about loving someone since Vesper or Tracy. But I'm just rattling on, but now I will say it was probably Daniel Craig's most classic Bond-type adventure, maybe in a Roger Moore-esque kind of way. It definitely has one of my favorite watches in it. I even have a version of it upstairs. That's not the Omega, but it's just my style of one. I'll explain in a later video. But this is one of all the Daniel Craig movies I'm picking up last. At number 4, we have Quantum of Solace. Now, I'm actually a fan of this one. I know a lot of people in the Bond community do not really care for Quantum of Solace because it's too Jason Bourne-like, or it's just this or that and the other. I have a buddy of mine who just despises, well, one, he's not a Daniel Craig fan, he's old school James Bond in terms of gadgets, this, that, and the other, whereas this is a very grounded movie. But I'm actually a fan of Quantum of Solace. Now, do I think it's one of the best James Bond movies of all time?
Absolutely not.
Or do I think it's one of the most entertaining? Yes. Now, coming from somebody who comes from a film background and has done editing and predominantly did editing whenever I was in the film industry, this movie is edited like shit. It is really quick cut. It is really just bam, 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 bam. And you have a little less than a second to look at some of the things that are happening. Now, if you watch the movie long enough, you kind of get the gist of what happens in the movie, so it makes the video or makes the movie a lot easier to watch on repeat viewings. But this is the Bond that I put on if I'm doing laundry and I'm folding and I just want to have something playing in the background. This is the Bond movie I play if I just, well, first of all, if I want to look for fashion inspiration, this is debatably James Bond's, Daniel Craig's version's best outfitted movie out of his entire 5 movies. And though I leaned into the style of Casino Royale more than any of the other movies, this one was probably the most universal for the majority of people. And the best way to describe this one is what David Zaritsky says on the Bond Experience YouTube channel, that this is what you would call badass Bond. He dresses really good, and Daniel Craig in terms of Bond, whereas he does look fantastic in a tux and a suit, he is the master of being the casual Bond, where you can put on a jacket, compare it with the right jeans, even the right chinos maybe, and you're gonna look just as good as badass Bond as you do elegant Bond. But the action's choppy, the performance of Craig is great. There's actually not even a movie where he's even bad in it even. Bond Girl, I actually enjoy that. She's more of an equal, and after the death of Vesper, I didn't expect a romance. Strawberry Fields is totally fine, but I'm also a fan of redheads, so. And it's a fun action movie for an hour and 40 minutes or however long it is. But again, it's just a fun movie. It doesn't speak volumes about anything about the character, and it's kind of, as most people say, Casino Royale 1.5 or 2.0. It's just like a epilogue. It's Casino Royale's epilogue. That's really all it is, but it's fun. Number 3, No Time to Die. So No Time to Die for me had so many good things, handful of bad things, but to me, there's so much more good that outweighs the bad. So for one, I like the style. Daniel Craig's performance is probably its second best. The Cuba scene, top tier. If the entire tenure of the Daniel Craig franchise was what the Cuba scene was, the right amount of action, suave, quips, humor, gadgets. If the Cuba scene had stretched, the style had stretched out all of Daniel Craig's tenure,
Daniel Craig would have been unstoppable.
Ana de Armas was a fantastic Bond girl, should have been in it much more than she was, but you know what? If you're gonna do a James Bond spinoff with a lady, have James Bond still be James Bond in another universe, because James Bond is James Bond. Have her story. I think most Bond fans would agree we'd be there. 2, the romance between Bond and Madeline Swan is actually believable, whereas in Spectre, I didn't mention this before, Spectre fell flat. I actually felt they cared about each other in this movie. And 2, I'm actually okay with James Bond having died. Now, I'm not happy that he died, because he's my favorite fictional character, and I don't ever want to see heroes die, especially, again, when they're good guys. But now, seeing that whole Daniel Craig arc of a story, him dying was a logical conclusion, though the reason why he had to die was kind of goofy, and I'll get to that in a second. James Bond dying is not really unheard of to a degree, and I can explain real quick, and then we'll get back to the movies. In the last continuation novel by Anthony Horowitz, A Mind to Kill, this takes place as essentially James Bond's last mission. And it was published by the Ian Fleming estate, so it is technically canon. It literally ends with him walking down a bridge, potentially about to die, and accepting his death potentially. And it ends on a cliffhanger, which insinuates to the fact that James Bond possibly could die, or does. I mean, it's a cliffhanger, but in context, he could die. He heard the unmistakable sound of automatic rifles being loaded, and he knew in just a few seconds, shots might be fired. He could almost feel the bullets tearing into his back. He saw himself stretched out face down on the asphalt. It might not be him, it might be someone else. Bond didn't care, he had made up his mind. He kept walking. So with that being said, Bond dying is technically a potential canon opportunity. No Time to Die just did it first. So with that being said, I'll move on to the next elephant in the room, James Bond having a kid. In terms of the movies, that was a bit of a plot twist and surprise, But in the original Ian Fleming novels, he evidently has an illegitimate child. From what I understand, I have all the originals, I've not read all the originals, it's on the plan this year. But it's canon that he has a child, so why not put it in the movies? And like I've said in other videos, I'm okay, because in the instance that this movie was not highly popular with hardcore James Bond fans, I'm okay if a movie fails if you're trying to do something different. I would much rather a movie fail for being different than for copy and pasting ideas we've seen over and over. But the bad, I thought Blofeld being in here was needless. It was literally just to tie up the idea of Spectre all of a sudden. I think Blofeld should have been the finale villain, because if there was going to be a villain who was going to kill James Bond, it should have been him. Blofeld is the Darth Vader to James Bond's Luke, minus the family ties, because that is still stupid. And two, and I really don't think this is the movie's fault, because hear me out. Because something that I have actually not seen a whole lot of other content creators consider is this, and hear this. So obviously this movie was delayed big time because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this movie specifically has to do with a virus-like nanobot that spreads and kills people on a potentially global basis. And though none of this is confirmed, but I would about bet, because there were confirmed reshoots, that the original plan was that the villain was going to have a virus that would wipe out X amount, very similar, very viral, just like COVID-19. But once the COVID-19 broke out, they went back and they reshot things to make it nanobots. So it was not so close to home and not so relevant, which I think would have been nice. It would have stapled its time more specifically to when it was made. It would have been relevant. I mean, I said relevant multiple times. It would have been very relevant. But they just didn't want to do that, so they went back and they made the nanobot rule. And I think that is where the big craterous plot hole of his Omega EMP watch not killing the nanobots inside him, when that totally would technically have worked, because nanobots are essentially robots and machine. So James Bond didn't really even have to die in that terms of logic. Whereas before, say if he had had a virus, one he could not get out with his EMP watch, he would have died and it would have made more sense. So I think that was a result of the time and reshoots rather than really a Bond issue with writing the first time. Number two, we have Skyfall. Skyfall, great movie. It is the most beautiful,
Did I mention beautiful?
beautifully shot James Bond film of them all. The opening is fantastic. Daniel Craig's performance is just electric throughout, and potentially his most Ian Fleming-esque performance. And even though I wasn't a crazy fan of the Home Alone style ending, it's grown on me and it's kind of fun. Judi Dench is amazing, but that's a given. There's not really anything she's never not been amazing in. Javier Bardem is his best villain in his tenure, and honestly even maybe one of the top 5 villains of the entire franchise, just for the energy and the maniacal sinisterness he brought to the table. And it's a little convoluted, especially in the subway chase scene in the very middle, and it kind of borrows from The Dark Knight a little too much, to an obvious extent. But here's the thing, James Bond's meant to shut your brain off, sit down, relax, and enjoy. So with that being said, Skyfall is fun and it holds a special place in my heart too. Reason being, I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, and at that time my grandmother had gotten cancer and she loved James Bond. She's really the one of 2 people who introduced me to James Bond majorly. And the reason this is affecting to me, the movie Skyfall, is because we bought tickets 3 times for her to maybe make a theater visit to see Skyfall in theaters, but unfortunately she wasn't in a good place to do so. So with that being said, it was just that Bond movie that my grandmother never got to see, but I got to see 3 times in theaters because I had to use those 3 tickets. But it's just nostalgic, well made beyond belief. Again, Sam Mendes made this movie. As I said, I sung his praises back in the Spectre part. Great movie. It's virtually spotless on a visual level. The style's good, the watch is great. And 3, and also one thing I will give it credit for 100% is that it is the most accessible James Bond movie there is. And I say that because I had my wife watch the Daniel Craig movies at the very least, and she liked them just fine, but she said that she wouldn't really probably watch these movies with or without me. They were fine. When the next movie comes out, she'll go watch it. She liked them enough for that. She's probably not gonna watch them by herself, but she liked Skyfall. She said between all of them, Skyfall was her favorite one. And when the movie came out, I went with a bunch of buddies who had never seen James Bond, and they loved it, and it opened the world to them. It is the James Bond movie for those who do not like James Bond or have never experienced James Bond. Bond. Great movie. And now for the holy grail for what most people and myself in the Bond community consider the best James Bond movie. And for this guy, it is his favorite movie. Because not only is it a good James Bond movie and the best James Bond movie, it is a great movie by itself without even it having to be attached to the James Bond franchise. Of course, this is Casino Royale. 2006, everything was against this movie aside from the fact it was the last publication Casino Royale novel. Not last publication, but it was the first book of the original series, but the last one to make it to the silver screen as an actual adaptation. But we got a blonde James Bond, who they said blonde Bond, to mock Daniel Craig before they even saw anything of him. Everybody was doubting this movie up front because after Die Another Day, which went science fiction campy, they didn't know what to expect. And then everyone and their mama brought their A game to set. Not only do we have one outstanding performance by Daniel Craig, we have the best Bond girl, an incredible score by David Arnold. Martin Campbell as director absolutely killed it. For one, GoldenEye is my second favorite James Bond movie of all time, so the fact that everything he touches in Bond's world turns to gold is proven here. You have a great villain in Mads Mikkelsen, and somehow for someone who likes to play cards on a light level, he makes this poker game at Casino Royale this most intoxicating, tense scene as if you're watching a standoff, as well as probably the most gruesome, torturous torture scene in a PG-13 movie ever, and as well as having outstanding action in several set pieces, all of it grounded while also believable to the fact that, yeah, James Bond bleeds all of a sudden, but you know what? I still believe this man would be alive after everything. Even that record-setting car flip that, even though now since being beaten in terms of a record holder, it even held a record for nearly 2 decades, which brings it down to the history books again. Literally, whenever I'm sick, I turn this movie on. And it has a little bit of everything, and I hate it when people say, yeah, the movie has everything. It has romance, it has action, it has this, it has that. This one literally does. And since James Bond is ultimately the male fantasy, you know what? You got good suits, you have beautiful women, great locations, you have cars, you have the action, you have a great love story with Vesper Lynn that does turn sour, and it's just, I don't know what I can say about this movie that can't already be said or seen elsewhere. It is a fantastic movie. And I don't know how you would have seen any other Craig movie without seeing this one. If you have not seen it,
Please watch it.
and that is my ranking for the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. Let me know down below what your ranking is of the Daniel Craig James Bond movie. Or is it similar to mine? Is it the exact same as yours? Or do you differ entirely? Do you even like Daniel Craig? Comment down below, subscribe, and again, thank you for watching PH.d TV. I'll catch you next time.